Welcome to another Talking Feds one-on-one. It's my pleasure to be talking today to a good friend personally and of the podcast, Frank Figliuzzi. As almost everyone knows, he's a national security contributor, regular columnist for NBC News, MSNBC. He was assistant director for counterintelligence at the FBI for 25 years and directed all espionage investigations across the government. He's the author previously of The FBI Way, Inside the Bureau's Code of Excellence, and he now has followed up No Sophomore Slump for him in a very different, very interesting book called Long Haul, Hunting the Highway Serial Killers, which I want to display, except I have an advanced copy, and Frank, you can maybe show us when you get there what it really looks like, but anyway, the book is at once a sort of social chronicle and a law enforcement thriller and just a kind of spellbinding tale. Frank Figliuzzi, thanks so much for joining.
Larry, it's been a while since I've been on with you, and I'm very appreciative that we've got some time carved out to do this because, boy, the news cycle has been crazy.
It's my pleasure. You know, it is funny on the news cycle. Lately, it's been more lawyerly. I think pretty soon the lawyers are going to withdraw and there'll be national and then politics, and that's just the ebb and flow. But you, fortunately, are in the news with the best of all, a kind of personal account. And actually, let me start with I have all these questions, but how's it been doing? How's Long Haul doing on the charts?
Look, pre-orders have been good. First week sales have been good. It's I'm learning a lot, of course, about PR and marketing. It's pretty neat when you see your book on a bookshelf in a Barnes and Noble or at a library, and that's pretty cool. We should have it in airport stores very soon.
Fantastic.
Lots and lots of interviews, Harry. Losing my voice frequently. So it's just all day, every day. You do these radio tours, they call them, right, where you're sitting at home and there's a producer in your ear who literally says, "You're in St. Louis with Bubba," and then you're with NPR.
Hello, St. Louis.
Hello, St. Louis. Yeah, and you better remember where you are, and
right.
Also, the question in your mind of, did I already say this to this host, or did I say that on the last show? Yeah.
Right. Well, nice problem to have. All right, so let's talk about the book. It's a tale of sort of three different cultures, it seems to me: long haul truckers, trafficking victims, and then there are people who are at least trying to. It's pretty hard to connect the dots to stop the killings. But the FBI Highway Serial Killing Initiative believe they've linked 850 murders of young women to a suspected 450 over-the-road truck drivers. So that already tells you part of the problem here is serial killers. But, Frank, this is really different for people who read your last book where you were telling people everything you knew in a career. This is something that you came to and fascinated you. How did you, learn about these cases, and what inspired you to write the book?
Well, you're right. This is different for me. And it's funny because 25 years in the FBI, I was a chief inspector doing audits across the FBI, all programs. So I was an assistant director. So I kind of prided myself on, I think I know all the nooks and crannies of the FBI, but I was floored when I found out the details of the FBI's Highway Serial Killings Initiative. And that was largely after I retired, when I ran into a woman who said, I work for the FBI in behavioral analysis. And I said, "Oh, what do you do?" And she said, "I'm the head of the Highway Serial Killings Initiative." And I said, "Okay, you kind of got me there. What's that?" And she proceeded to hit me with the numbers. You've already mentioned some of the numbers. 850 murders of women, mostly sex trafficked women, alongside our nation's highways over just the past few decades. 450 active suspects in 200 open unsolved cases. And there are already 25 long haulers in prison for multiple murders, yet that doesn't begin to touch the unsolved cases. And this isn't a history book, although there's history in it. It's still happening. And so this initiative still very much exists. So what's going on? Long haul truckers, serial killers, thank God, just a tiny fraction of long haul truckers. And I sing the praises of long haul truckers.
Maybe. I mean, no, that's right. There's the dedication is to long haul truckers. We couldn't do without, but although part of the problem is how, man, that is a tough job. You lived it for a week, and we'll talk more about that. But you're right. I wanted to ask you, it does seem to be a subset, mainly among people who own their own trucks, which is like fewer than 10%. But are you able to, quantify how small, what sort of subset of overall truckers where, people are focused on?
Yeah, I mean, because I am at my heart an investigator, I wanted to try to reduce that 450 suspect number into a more manageable number. So I asked some really tough questions. Who is it among the long haul community with what kind of trucking that might be more prone and able to kill? I ask a similar question with the other subculture in the book, which is the sex trafficking victims. Who amongst those who are trafficked, based on their work styles, are they pimp controlled or not? What kind of pimp?
Color, hair, I mean, everything. This is what really struck me as a former law enforcement guy is it seems like the problem so hard to penetrate really needs to go at it from the victim side to make headway. But I'm getting ahead of myself and ourselves. So let's talk a little bit more about the dimensions. So 850, 450, 25 in prison, et cetera. Let's kind of throw the net over the problem.
And yeah, those numbers are disturbing enough. Now throw in the fact that your victim population is transient, is often sex trafficked. Their deaths are not necessarily getting to the top of the pile. In some rural county sheriff's office, the truckers are exploiting the seams in law enforcement. They're grabbing their victim in one jurisdiction, they're killing and raping her in a second, and they're dumping her in a third. That really causes chaos among the law enforcement community. Whose case is this? We don't know. Who is she? We don't know. The families of these often young women are not even aware they're missing. They long ago have distanced themselves because out of survival. Experts tell me this is what happens in these families. How often can you bail your daughter or sister out of jail? How often can you tolerate your loved one overdosing at the dinner table? And you begin to distance yourself. So by the time
then you write also for the victims, there's an element of shame because so often they'll then move into prostitution. So the family has had all this drug stuff where but then when the victim begins to be a prostitute, they can't bear to stay in touch with their families, right?
Exactly. The shame factor also prevents many of these victims who have survived violent encounters from reporting that encounter with a trucker to law enforcement. I interviewed women who were trafficked to truckers and survived to tell about it, including surviving violent encounters. Two of the women I spoke with are actually helping to run resource centers that help women escape the trap of trafficking. But with the exploitation of the seams in jurisdictions, these truckers are, 3 states away by the time anybody knows anything's happened. Maybe they're months down the road. And the challenge of law enforcement saying, look, I don't know, this girl was last seen at this red stop 2 states away. Maybe we go ask all the trucking companies to give us all their trucks that passed through that rest stop, 2 weeks ago. Really challenging work.
Yeah. And you mentioned the FBI trafficking for it, but I gather until recently, the FBI, as you put it, couldn't or wouldn't actually take on these cases. And you had a few pioneers at the state level, Terry Turner, I think, and others who really have filled. Now the FBI is getting a little bit into it, but what you describe is a classic. I mean, it's hard cases, but so are other cold cases, but the Bureau's role here seems, even to this day, am I wrong about this, kind of selective and not sort of all hands on deck, or is that understated?
Well, there's certainly, all hands on deck now with this. They've got it really streamlined with their own database called the Highway Serial Killings Initiative database. It sits within the much larger VICAP, Violent Crime Apprehension Program. database, but they were dragged
They
into.
don't really work the cases in the same way,
It's
however.
not right. It's not their case because there's no, murder. As I tell people, murder is not necessarily a federal violation unless it happens on a federal property, right? Or to a federal protectee or agent or officer. So what is this? This is support. This is providing local, county, and state law enforcement, FBI resources, largely in the form of algorithms and computerization that literally try to connect the dots to stop the killing. Also, there's the behavioral profilers who are special agents who can come in and help with that. But here's how this started in a nutshell. It happened in Oklahoma. The start of this FBI initiative was Oklahoma, and it was not with the FBI in Oklahoma. It was Terry Turner, as you mentioned, who is a hero in this book. She's a crime analyst in Oklahoma State Agency. She's the one who, around 2003, starts experiencing evidence that women are missing from Oklahoma and turning up dead around the country. And there's commonalities. They are often trafficked young ladies, very young. They are found at or near an interstate highway, often last seen at or near a truck stop. And she begins to kind of figuratively pound her fist on the desk to her leadership. And I'm proud of her because, my own knowledge of, like, say, go 40 years back and say, what's a female crime analyst and how credible is she in a state agency? She's the one who's being asked to get coffee, right?
Right.
And that's not Terry Turner. Terry Turner.
Right. A little bit similar in the trucking industry, according to your buddy Mike, but go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. So, right. That's not her. She's tenacious. And she refers to these missing and killed women as, quote, my girls. So she asks her leadership, can I put out a teletype to detectives, homicide detectives around the country, in case they've got a case like this? Let them come here for a meeting. We'll get the donuts and coffee. And she expects maybe 8 or 10 detectives to show up. Dozens of detectives show up and say, I've got similar cases. And then she shames the FBI into showing up. And when the FBI shows up, they go, oh, you have serial killings. And
donuts.
And donuts. Always helpful. And that's the start. That's the start of the initiative.
Okay, so we focus a little on the law enforcement community, in some ways the third player in your book, next to the truckers and victims. Let's talk about truckers a little bit more. Do you have a sense, Frank? I mean, so obviously just taking the figure 450 and 850, we know there are some, and you document some of them, killers responsible for, who are serial murderers. Do you have a sense that the murders are sort of made on the road, long hours, solitude, stress, or do you have a sense that they proceed and they come to the jobs and trucking jobs give them an opportunity they already were seeking?
So that's the age-old nature or nurture question, which I do pose in the book and spend some time discussing. And the answer, of course, in a complicated matter is yes, it's both. It's both because, you don't become a serial killer overnight. Often the experts will tell us this is a combination of genetics. The synapses aren't all firing correctly in the brain, and a horrific environment often in your childhood, and signs of that with maybe violence and abuse being experienced as a child. That's true for many of the serial killers I looked at in this. But then what? What gets you over the edge? Maybe you've had violence against animals. Maybe you like setting cats on fire. What gets you to killing humans? And it's clear to me that there's some of these killers are attracted to long hauling because it affords them the isolation, the antisocial lifestyle, the freedom on the road that they are naturally gravitating toward. And the light bulb goes on. As some in interviews by others have said, I realized I could pretty much get away with anything, including murder. Now, throw in this anger and resentment toward women, maybe because of an absent mother or an abusive mother, which is the case in some of these cases. And now you've got this roadmap, no pun intended, for a killer. The experts tell me, and I interviewed the top crime analysts in this program. By the way, they're women. They are women. And in the Bureau.
And actually, some of the law enforcement heroes here are former victims even. Right.
Yeah, well, some of the women, the victims I interview who are now survivors and thrivers are running resource centers very successfully to help women get out of the trap. But, what the experts tell me is there's two kinds of serial killers, and this applies to truckers who kill versus other serial killers as well. The first one is all about controlling the outcome. This is a power thing, and they get off on prolonged torture, multiple rapes. I talk about Robert Ben Rhodes in the book, who, would kidnap and rape and torture for weeks on end, a single victim. He kidnapped Regina Walters, age 14, who was just hitchhiking with her boyfriend. He kills her boyfriend quickly. He's a speed bump in his way. He then rides across country with Regina, torturing her, hanging her from fish hooks in the truck. She's finally found decomposing in an abandoned farmhouse in Illinois. By the way, one of the most ghastly photos I've ever seen. I've seen a lot of blood and gore in my FBI career, but this photo of Regina, it's the last known photo of her alive. It's taken by Robert Ben Rhodes, her killer. And it's not because of the content of the photos. She's not naked or bleeding in this photo, but rather the context. It's her last living photo. She knows it too. And she's in a black dress and high heels that Rhodes made her wear, bought for her. He has cut her hair very short. She knows what's coming, and her arms and hands are outstretched, and she's pleading for her life. In fact, Robert Ben Rhodes was so cruel that at some point in the journey, he calls her father and says, "I've made some changes. I cut her hair." And it's just a ghastly image. So we talked about the first kind of killer. The sex is happening for that transaction. That's going to happen.
Yeah.
Second kind of killer is all about killing, and it's not about sex. And the killing is going to happen very quickly. And that just gives you the sense of urgency that law enforcement experiences when someone is missing.
All right. I mean, this is almost a funny transition, but I wanted at least to talk. I mean, part of this is the trucking life. A very high percentage of truckers drink and use drugs, and it is, as you say, that it can be isolating. Then, man, it's tough. Their conditions. You talk about risk it for the biscuit. They really push very hard. I just wanted to ask you. You decided to embed yourself with a guy for a third of the book is you living the trucker's life, getting up at 5 and cooking breakfast and all day long and sleeping in the back of the cab. Just tell us a little bit about why you did it, how you, connected with your trucking buddy, and what that sort of taught you for the book's purposes.
Yeah, I didn't want to write the book that's all full of scariness and blood and gore, and then say, well, have a nice day. I wanted to get deep into subcultures. And these are subcultures that operate just under our noses, hiding in plain sight. And, for anybody that's always wondered, I wonder what goes on in that big rig. I wonder what that life is like for that trucker. I wanted to get a flavor of it. Does 2,000 miles make me an expert on long hauling? Absolutely not. But I can tell you this, it's no Ritz-Carlton inside that rig and sleeping in the top berth. And listen, it is, I looked at medical studies that I quote in the book. It is a hard, brutal life, sedentary. Your legs start going numb after a few hours. And thank God I wasn't driving. I got up and started walking around in the rig. Eating healthy, very, very difficult. We really tried, but it's hard. It's isolating. The studies I quote from show us that the heart and cardiac issues, the drinking, even drug use, you got to stay awake, then you got to come down at night. And one survey, anonymous survey of long haulers, large study, 10% of them say they drink alcohol every day. 20% say they binge drink 5 or more drinks at a time, and 44% are manifesting symptoms of major clinical depression.
And I mean, this is part of you dedicate to you develop a lot of sympathy. It does seem very hard, and they're just the competition, and you can think of in other countries it could be. I mean, we do have the semblance of regulation, but there's all kinds of reasons that they kind of elude it because you to really make some money, it's the conditions you just have to go. It's crazy. Nevertheless, that's another book to put aside. So let's go to the sort of third demi-monde of the book, and in some ways the most harrowing and tragic. But you go a lot into the whole sort of there's a social structure of the world of sex trafficking, and young women. Some are with pimps. I was fascinated with their bottom lot lizards, renegades, outlaws. There's a whole sociology here, and there are a certain women choices, even when drug addled, as so many of them are a little bit, not obvious to many of the people who come to the book. Some would have reasons for having pimps and protection. You want to know, why don't they just leave? And what happens that they become really sort of ripe to be victims of serial killers. So just tell us a little bit about that world and how it dovetails with all of these are tragedies, but ones that can really become prey for trucker killers.
Yeah, for sure. This is indeed one of the three subcultures in the book, and I wanted again to learn from the experts. So I ended up spending hours days even speaking with the top two trafficking experts in the nation. Both of them happen to be college professors, deep into serious research on this topic of level and truck stop trafficking. But they're not just academics. That's what really attracted them to me, because they're on the street helping women in different ways, of different models of how to get out of trafficking. One of them is kind of the old guard. Dr. Celia Williamson, University of Toledo, she started an organization called RISE, which, by the way, won the FBI Director's Community Leadership Award one year, because what they're doing, and the other expert is also doing this, Dr. Dominique Rosepowitz at the Arizona State University. She runs a place called Starfish Place, which I've physically visited, for young trafficking victims who have young children of themselves. Phenomenal work and research there. But those two women taught me the different kinds of trafficking. So there are work styles. There are pimp-controlled trafficking victims. There's two kinds of pimps, guerrilla and finesse. There's three major types of trafficking victims. One is pimp-controlled. One is a renegade that's out either by herself or with a friend or two. And then there's outlaws who actually will fake that they're going to have sex for money, but there will be no sex because they're going to commit a crime against their client. They're going to rip you off. And so I start asking that investigator question: who is more likely to get killed? And you might say, well, that outlaw sounds pretty dangerous. They're ripping a guy off, and he's not going to be happy about it. But the reality is that he's not going to go to the police and claim that he's been robbed by a sex worker. They're out and gone. They have a plan. They're going to do their crime and get out. Then I go, well, pimp control, boy, they're monitored a lot. The pimp has an eye on them. The bottom girl, who is kind of a deputy pimp or supervising girl of over.
Yeah, this was a really interesting role, the kind of, lieutenant to keep the girls in line. There's an actual sort of, place in the hierarchy for her. Sorry, go ahead.
It's brutal. I spoke to women who were beaten and raped, not only by the pimp, but by the bottom girl trying to keep them in line. I don't cry easily, but tears came to my eyes during one interview when this woman just kept sobbing about the trauma she's experienced in her life. And just as there's commonalities among the serial killer truckers, there are commonalities among the victims. What do I mean by that?
Please.
If you think, this book's really not for me, because, no one in my family or circle of friends or network, no young lady I know would ever be involved and fall prey to trafficking. I'm here to tell you that my biases went out the window on this, because it's wrong. The grooming and recruitment process happens regardless of socioeconomic background, ethnicity, or race. One victim I talked to was a preacher's kid, good, strong values in that family. Another was a girl from the upper Midwest who went to college. But what are the commonalities? Early childhood trauma, often in the form of unwanted touching or sexual molestation, early exposure to drug use, often starting with marijuana, what I call a tower of trauma in the life that stacks up. Parents are domestic violence participants. The police come to the house. There's death or suicide. There's major illness. And then the bad boyfriends, I mean, really bad boyfriends, and the grooming and recruitment and the exposure to hard drugs, sometimes deliberately, so that the rationale occurs. I'm having sex anyway. I might as well have sex for money. It's going to pay for our drugs. My boyfriend is the only person who loves me anymore. And of course, that becomes a pimp relationship. That's the falling down into the trap.
And is it right though, Frank? You ask why don't they just leave sometimes? But the victims in this sort of savage jungle with bottoms and the like, there at least there's some protection. The most vulnerable victims are the ones who go out on their own and try to be, independent contractors, as it were. Yeah.
Yeah, but again, just as like with the truckers, where I try to theorize and say, okay, it's probably not the big corporate driver, right? Yeah. They're highly monitored through technology. Well, as soon as I'd come to that conclusion, I'd find cases where a corporate driver parked his rig for his mandatory federal downtime, got in an Uber or a rental car, and went out and did his killing. Similarly, with the pimp-controlled women, I spoke to women who were pimp-controlled and absolutely suffered beatings inside the cab of a truck while their pimp was oblivious, maybe on the other side of the truck stop or not there at all. So, one woman was tossed out of the truck like so much trash. And yeah, so the theories are good, but they're not all correct.
Yeah. I mean, it does seem like on top of it, the combination of tragedy and difficulty of solving. I just want to add to your point, if you think this book is not for you, listener, guess again, because on top of everything else, you write beautifully, and it's just such a page turner. I'm confident it's the only book ever written by an FBI agent using the word Brobdingnagian. Congratulations on that. But seriously, it's so writerly, and it's very impressive that way. All right, let's move. So we've gone through the three subcultures. You do have, it is hard going, and part of the not the solution, but the amelioration is in places like Starfish Place, which you talk about. You do, and you combine all the knowledge you've gained, some quickly, some in crash courses, and other in your career, to try to posit some tentative ways to get at the problem, which is so vexing. Want to talk about that? You kind of detail that a little bit at the end of the book. What if you were, running the world, and this problem you think could actually be, tangible tools that would help?
I did want to offer some technique here, even from my own law enforcement career that I've seen work before. So let's start with the partnership between law enforcement and private organizations. That is what's working around the country. What does that look like? Well, in places like Phoenix, Las Vegas, Toledo, Ohio, the police and county sheriffs are partnering with social services organizations, and what they do is they don't treat the victim as a criminal. The idea of handcuffing and charging a true trafficking victim simply is archaic these days, yet departments continue to do it. The progressive departments are partnered with the social services organizations, and what they do with that young lady is they approach her and say, "You're not getting arrested tonight." So the partnership, essential in your community. Because they don't do the arrest, they do the referral. They say, "What do you need tonight to get away from your pimp?" And they go, "Oh, okay, not getting arrested. Because getting arrested, you know what that does? It forces the pimp to show up as the hero and bail the young lady out of prison, out of jail. And so she becomes the hero, he's even more the hero. So you got to break that cycle. And now the social services people say, you need a roof over your head tonight. We've got that. We've got a shelter set up. We've got an apartment set up. You need training to be the hairstylist you want to be or the paralegal you want to be. We've got people in the community who will help get you through that training. You need drug addiction services. We have them ready tonight, ready to go tonight to help you. You need diapers for your baby. You can't afford them. We have that tonight and moving forward. And that works. And once that trust is developed, then comes the young lady with the detective who says, who is your pimp? Who is your pimp? And then, weeks or days later, she finally feels like she can give up her pimp and the entire operation. And this method has taken down nationwide trafficking rings. So I'm a big fan of that partnership. Number two, we've got to address the demand side of this equation. We're talking a lot about the supply side with the women. We're not arresting enough men, or Johns, as they're called in the business. And there are some great programs out there to kind of set this up, to scare the hell out of men and charge men. And Dr. Dominique Rosepowitz at ASU has done great research and developed algorithms that actually look at ads online, because everything's moved online. Ads online soliciting sex for money.
And again, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but let's talk about, would you include also the way moving online and the use of money apps, whatever, has made this either harder or easier? What part of the problem that is? But sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So look, the days of women kind of physically working the parking lot at the truck stop are almost done, as the big industry truck stop companies are cleaning up the act. But it's moved online, and that's a blessing and a curse, because it's not visible. As I was driving through the country, we were looking up, and even in small towns, I'm looking at online at ads targeting truckers. I'm trucker friendly. I come to you, you come to me. And it's moved to massage parlors. It's moved to nearby seedy hotels near the truck stop. I believe that's even more dangerous for the victim. I believe they're now alone in that motel room, no one to hear them, no one to care. And if that turns into a dead body, the law enforcement officers responding have no clue as to whether it was a trucker who hopped in an Uber or not. So even tracking the deaths now is difficult. But the online activity has been researched heavily now, and there are methods used to identify ads that are more likely to be from a trafficked woman or from an underage minor. And that's really the cutting edge right now.
Okay, and have I interrupted you to ask about that? Did we canvass fully your ideas for trying to make some inroads here?
Well, let's go to the trucking side quickly and look at what we can do better there. So, look, I respect the hell out of the trucking industry and modern day truckers. They make good money. Some of them 6 figures. Some of them, but we've got to vet these people better. We've got to treat them like the essential workers that they are. We should probably pay them more. And I caught on to something. Did you know that the law permits a second chance program in the trucking industry, where trucking companies are permitted to hire felons, ex-cons? It's part of a legitimate desire to get people acclimated out of prison and back into the economy. I'm all for that. However, there are companies that totally look the other way with regard to which crimes you've been charged and imprisoned with. So we should be looking at crimes of violence, particularly against women. We should be looking at crimes involving alcoholism, drug use. That's important to get our hands around that. And I'm a huge fan of calling for mandatory tracking of all tractor trailers. Not just the big corporations, but the mom and pop shops, the medium-sized trucking companies absolutely should have mandated tracking devices on their trucks so that law enforcement can go backwards in time and download where that truck was.
All right. Look, I just want to say again in closing, it's not just a super interesting story, but it's beautifully written. Frank Figliuzzi, 25 years as special agent and MSNBC contributor and columnist, now 2 books under your belt. What's on your plate next?
Rest.
Very good.
After this promotional tour I'm doing, but you've been part of it. It's clear. I love this interview because it's clear that you've read the book. I'm not going to say anything about certain other interviewers. You've read the book, you know it, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate your time.
Not at all. Really good talking to you. Best of luck with the book, and best of luck or whatever. Godspeed to everybody working on this problem that was a sort of eye-opener to me as well.
You too. Thanks, Harry.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video and other Talking Feds content, please take a second to like and subscribe. Talk to you later.